On this week's segment of IGN Unfiltered, Brian Fargo talks about building Interplay from the ground up, becoming one of the most successful and renowned studios in the world. Let's talk to him. So you started Interplay at 20, if I have it right here.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that, again, given your family background, that your family was very supportive of your entrepreneurial efforts.
They've always been great. I mean, I give them a lot of credit. So for whatever I was doing, they were very supportive with my endeavors and anything they could do to help. They didn't really know what I was doing at that point, right? But they thought it was good. So yeah.
So and at first you were a for-hire development house, Interplay.
That's right.
What made you change to wanting to publish games as well?
Yeah, so at the time, a lot of the games that were being made that were successful were made by very small teams. It was Dr. J and Larry Bird Go One-on-One, or Bill Budge's Pinball Construction Set, or even Aclabeth and Ultima series, mostly by Richard doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So whereas I wanted to do sort of games with more talents coming into it than just two people, wanted somebody to answer the phones rather than us, right? Wanted to have an office building, wanted to have like a real company. And we did the Bard's Tale, right? And we number one, and we were just making a little bit of money.
Yeah.
And then we do Bard's Tale 2, another number one hit, we're making a little bit of money. So I remember the time I went to Electronic Arts and said, hey, this is as good as it gets. And, we were like over 10% of their business or something. It was a big piece at the time. And I said, I got to improve the deal, otherwise what's the point? And I said, can we get our royalty to like 20% from 15? They're like, absolutely not, right? So I said, okay, all right, well then I'll just, the only way to do it is to start financing it myself so I can get a bigger piece of the pie. And so that's what drove me towards being a publisher, was just so for survival more than anything.
Well, and maybe EA maybe they rue that day. They could have had a better business relationship with you.
Yeah, all things are meant to be sometimes, right?
So, ton of great RPGs at Interplay over the years. Bard's Tale, Wasteland, Fallout. Do you have a favorite kid amongst all the games over the years at Interplay?
Of a role-playing game, or just in general, or?
I mean, in general, yeah.
Yeah.
So any that really stuck out to you over the years that just are really extra near and dear to you?
God. It's so hard for me to pick one, only because there were pivot points at Interplay where, if not for that game, we would have gone out of business.
Yeah.
Right. And so I can't help but pick those. Right. So
Makes sense.
I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Bard's Tale. Right. And then when I think it was Castles. There was Battle Chess. We were the first affiliate publisher. Right. So we bet the farm on Battle Chess, right? And it worked, and we moved to the next level. And then we had to break away from Activision, a different Activision than today. They were going bankrupt. They were my distributor, and so I had to pull off, and I had to go to direct to all of the retailers. And that was a nightmare because I had to take back returns from products I never got paid for to begin with. So if Castles didn't work, we were out of business. Wow. And so there's been a series of those along the way. I remember we did a game with Blizzard. It was RPM Racing.
Yeah.
And it was.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that next.
Yeah. So I actually had to borrow money from my wife's father just to buy, because the units were like $20 a piece, right? So if I want another 20,000 or 5,000 pieces, that's $100,000 right now. We have no money, so we bet the farm on that, and so to me it was all those seminal titles that made a big deal. I mean, Fallout certainly is my biggest impact on pop culture, and it's my people don't know what I do. I bring that one up, and they go, oh yeah, so you can't help but pick that one. But there were just so many important games that were critical for our survival that I would be. It wouldn't feel right by not putting them on the list. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but you just sort of touched on it. You were sort of in a way involved with the founding of Blizzard with RPM Racing. I foolishly didn't write that. I forget their name at the time.
Silicon and Synapse.
Yes,
right,
thank you.
Right.
So yeah, how do you end up meeting up with those guys and working on doing the game together?
Well, so I knew them. I mean, at the time, of course, there was no internet, and so we were kids basically, and we would get a game and we would trade software, right? I mean, that was the thing back then. You didn't even. The store had very few things. We make copies, right, which you can't do today, or weren't supposed to do anyway. But we were, that's how I knew those guys. And later, Alan went into the military, and Interplay kept going. He got back, and he said, I want to do what you're doing. That looks great. And I said, well, let me help you. And so we gave them their first contracts to get them launched into the business.
Wow. That's a nice notch on your belt, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I helped kickstart Blizzard in a way.
Well, you know, and I actually own 10% of Blizzard, right? And people go, oh, can't believe you sold it, right? But in fairness, there's things called drag-along rights, and so when they wanted to sell their company to Davidson, I got dragged along with it. Even though I wouldn't have stopped it anyway, I wouldn't have said, you know, I'm not going to hang on and mess up the deal, right? I would never do that. So, but you know, imagine if they said no, please keep it. You know, wow.
Okay, yeah.
But it wasn't an option of mine. But yeah, no, they were. I always like, I like to think I have a good eye for talent, right? I sort of
that is what you're known for.
Part of my job is to know a good idea when I hear it and know good talent when I meet them.
You're credited on a bunch of other fascinating games over the years. I want to throw some out, and just if you have an anecdote or memory, feel free to share, because there are some even here I didn't know. Like I knew, you know, I was a big PC gamer in the '90s and was familiar with a lot of these, but you actually got to work with Nintendo. Mario Teaches Typing.
Yeah. So I got a funny story with that one. So at the time, Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing was the big
one.
Right, and I knew Les Crane was Software Toolworks, and so I had seen somewhere that like over half the people were buying it to teach their kid how to type. So I thought, well, God, you know, a teacher, you know, what's more interesting than a teacher but Mario, right? So I went to Nintendo and I pitched them, and they loved it. So we put Mario Brothers out, and it's a huge success, right? And then he got so angry with me. Well, I actually went to his show, and he was giving me like this stink eye, you know. And my wife goes, well, that guy really doesn't like you, you know. And I go, oh my gosh, you know. So I call him up, and I'm like, did I do something? He goes, no. I said, really? No. He goes, no. I said, well, get this in the tone of your voice, you know. He goes, well, yeah. And I go, well, you know, you're competing with me. I said, oh, come on, you know, you're competing with other people, right? Anyway, he was so mad at me. Anyway, we made up for it later, but it's kind of funny.
Because like I feel like Nintendo they don't really do that stuff anymore. I guess they were.
Well, actually, we did Mario Teaches Typing, then we did Mario's Game Gallery. Miyamoto, he liked what we were doing, right? And so everybody was happy, and then somebody else came out with some other Mario product that was not high quality. And so they came back and said, no more with Mario. And we said, yeah, but you like us. He said, Brian, we do, but he says, no more. That's
Somebody
it.
else ruined it. They ruined it. Good.
The
gravy train comes to
I know. That was a big success for us, Mario Teaches Typing.
How about, because this one I always remember this and just laugh because it was sort of a humorous game, Clay Fighter.
Yeah. That was a game that was pitched to us by Visual Concepts, and they were doing some great work. And that was a big success, and we had a couple things with it. One is I remember we got Bruce Buffer, right? So, you know, instead of let's get ready to rumble, he says, let's get ready to crumble, right? And so that was always kind of a crack up. And then we did well with that. I remember Blockbuster, we did a special version for Blockbuster. It was like a limited edition, just to rent, for Blockbuster, and we made like $1 million on that deal. Wow. And that probably made our entire year. And that's what they're good.
There go the questions.
That's one thing you'll find in business. You'll do 100 things in business, and then you'll get to the end of the year, and you're like, if we hadn't done that one thing, it wouldn't have been a profitable year. That's why you got to do the 100 or the 101 or whatever. It all comes down to one or two things that makes the difference.
And yeah, Clay Fighter was sort of this almost parody of the fighting game genre, which was huge at that time. From Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. But it was good. People liked it.
They really did. It had a lot of personality.
And then this one's very near and dear to my heart. I just remember this game so fondly. Out of This World.
Oh yeah, Eric Shahi. That was so. Back in the day, one of the things I used to do, which I loved in my business, and it finally stopped, was I would go over to Europe for the trade shows like ECTS, and it'd be like, you know, like an E3, and there'd be booths up and down the thing, and I would try to find product that I thought could work in America.
Smart.
Right.
That's smart.
And so I had plenty of competition, but it was whether I had a better eye and I could negotiate getting it. And so it was Delphine Software, and I loved the work they were doing. Yeah. So that's where I got out of This World or Another World. And then Alone in the Dark was the same thing, right? And then I did work with Gremlin Software, and so I was always sort of sourcing. Eventually, those companies started to set up shop in America,
Figure it out themselves.
and I couldn't get the rights. But it was sort of as an intellectual exercise. It was fun to just, because remember, there were hundreds of games.
Sure.
So you got to find just the right one and figure out how to make it work.
Find all those needles in the haystack.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed that.
So by the mid-90s, Interplay was up to over 600 people at the company, which that's a lot for a AAA game studio now, let alone back then.
Yeah.
Was that too much too fast in hindsight, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we were, in some ways, we were a victim of our own success, and I'll tell you why I say that. So we did RPM racing, and it did great, right?
Yeah.
So okay, let's do more of that. I did a pool game, virtual pool. It sold 300,000 or 400,000 pieces.
I remember that.
Let's do sports, right? We did Mario Teaches Typing, sells 700,000. Let's do educational software, right? And so we had hit in every single category. We had role playing. Let's do more of that. So we took all of our strengths. Now, at the same time, Universal Studios had come in and invested into the company. And they'd put $10 million in, which sounds like a lot of money, but except in the games business, that goes quickly, right? And they said, let's build this thing up. So it's kind of a perfect storm, right? We had all this success, they threw in the money, and then everything didn't work in every category, right? It was like we had like every single thing stopped working. And then we also had deals in Japan with Matsushita, and they didn't come through on their side. It was just like everything at once. And so, yeah, that was a miserable time. But we did at least. I'm very proud that, because we've always had more financial pressure than most, and we've usually had less resources than most. But yet, when I look at the 90s and what we did at Interplay, we were putting out some great stuff, despite all those pressures. It was Baldur's Gate, Fallout, Planescape Torment, Descent, you name it, right? I mean, there was a lot of, maybe not Descent was early, we didn't have so much financial pressure at that point, but later on, anything from kind of 95 on, we had guns at our head, but we were staying, true to the quality of the company. But certainly we were too big, yeah.
So tell me about your memories of the origin of Black Isle, because it of course, the legendary role-playing studio, it formed within Interplay.
Right. So that came about because we were doing lots of different kinds of products, right? We were doing strategy games. We had a game called Max. We were doing adventure games, like I said, action games, role-playing games. So I said, well, most of the companies that have a brand associated with themselves, they do one kind of thing, generally speaking. Then you're like, EA Sports, we know they do great sports, right? And so I felt like that we were getting diluted into what does Interplay represent? So I didn't want to represent nothing, and so the idea was, okay, let's divisionalize these groups. Okay, Fergus, you're going to run the RPG group, and I think Fallout had already shipped when Black Isle got formed, even though it was a lot of the guys were in Black Isle, they came up with the name, and he ran the group, and off they went, and each group did their thing, and then it was, in a way, survival of the fittest as to who could make their groups work.
Did you know that the Black Isle group was something special, that they were the best of the best?
Yeah, and I mean, they were always super. I mean, that was our bread and butter, role-playing games. But yeah, we had honed ourselves for many years, and we had the right sensibilities. So with a lot of this stuff, if you're going to be in a category, you need to be talking about it 24 hours a day, right? What other people are doing, what innovations are happening, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was a big part of it. And of course, we gave BioWare their first break too, right?
Shattered Steel?
With Shattered Steel, and which was not a success, but we thought, well, these guys are talented. Let's give them another try with Baldur's Gate. And I'd gotten the Dungeons and Dragons license, right? Which at the time I was told was a horrible idea. I remember one of the leading publishers says, Brian, you're nicheware for nerds. That's all you do, And I said, well, for us, getting D&D was like a big deal.
Sure.
And of course, it worked out great. So that's kind of how it all came about.
So when Black Isle wanted to do Fallout, which was inspired by your game Wasteland, which is very revered, what did you think when Fallout gets pitched to you?
Well, post-apocalyptic has always been my favorite category in terms of film and books, right? And so whether it was, references of Mad Max or Swan Song or Canticle for Leibowitz, or you choose it. So I've always been drawn to that, and I had tried to get the rights to Wasteland back from EA for year after year after year, so I finally gave up, threw in the towel, and said, let's just do one ourselves.
Yeah.
Right, and so that's how Fallout was born.
Interesting, very interesting.
Yeah, and then we studied the sensibilities of Wasteland. What made that work? Like the open nature of it, the skill-based system, blah, 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 right? So that we sort of analyzed all the things that we thought worked. And there's also a lot of things where the names are very similar too, as you go from Wasteland to Fallout.
So, and I imagine that, you were very personally involved with Fallout. I imagine that was a pretty personal project for you, given its,
It was, though I will say, and it was for sure, but then, what I try to do is I try to get the groups, I try to bring lots of talented people together, best of breed. I'm like an orchestra pit, right? And it gets to a point where a game sort of starts moving on itself and becomes this organic thing, like magic. And those guys started firing on all cylinders, and they started doing things that I wasn't involved with, which was great, right? So I would fight for things that I knew were right, so when they started going with the 50s, kind of the innocence of the 50s mixed with the violence, I went brilliant, right? So they kind of ran with it and made it bigger. I think all these games are about making something bigger than any one person could ever do, and how can you facilitate that kind of environment and allow that to happen?
So, things eventually go south with Interplay, and is it fair to say that you left over a power struggle at Interplay?
Well, I don't know if well, I can just tell you what happened.
Yeah,
I don't know what words to use. So we did, Titus came in the company. We'd gone public. The public market kind of depressed. It left us in a vulnerable position. They were going to come in and shore up our financing, and so that wasn't a healthy relationship. And then at one point, I had a buyer for the company, and they had traded their negotiation, which turned off the buyer. And I was sort of scrambling for many, many years, just trying to shore us back up financially. And I got very, very close. We had like $50 million of debt at one point, and I'd worked it down to $5 million.
Wow.
And then I had somebody coming in that was going to take out the $5 million, put money in the bank. And I was like, I can get back to doing what I do.
Sure.
And they said, we kind of might want to do a hostile takeover. Well, so after, what I thought was a pretty incredible effort, I thought, I'm going to have a heart attack, right? I mean, and I had very small share of the company at that point. So I just said, look, I'm not going to fight about this. You go for it. I got to do something else. And so so however you want to categorize that's what happened.
Did it kill you to walk away from the company you'd built?
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, it was who I was, right? I mean, I was identified with it, and then of course you got to see later, like, who's returning my phone calls now? I was like, oh, he's not in a power seat. Well, now what, right? So that was kind of interesting to see what happened there. But yeah, no, it was definitely tough, and I loved my people, I loved the product, and and I felt like it was not in the best of hands, but I couldn't do it. And I take responsibility for all the bad decisions that got us there too. It's not like everybody else's fault. Right. Business is tough. I mean, we're in the entertainment business fundamentally, and a lot of the companies, we didn't have that seminal hit. That Grand Theft Auto, that Tony Hawk, the THQ Wrestling, that thing that could just ride you through the hard times. And you look at a lot of entertainment businesses, like Universal had it with the monster films, like in the 30s or 40s, right? What was that thing? And Baldur's Gate was big for us, but we had a big heavy royalty load to BioWare and TSR. So if not for those two things, of course it wouldn't have existed without them, but that aside, financially speaking, if we didn't have that, we would have been in a far different position. So we didn't have that one title that was that was controlled,
or that you could rely on to go back to the well. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So,
do you actively, are you rooting against Interplay? Are you kind of rooting for them to fail after that, or is there a part of you where because you built it, you still you still have a soft spot for them in your heart?
I would never root against my people not having jobs, right? So no. I mean, to me, you sort of get yourself back up, dust yourself off, and you move on to something else that's positive. So no, I never rooted against them in that way.
Be sure to check back next week for another segment from my interview with Brian Fargo, and check back every month for brand new episodes of IGN Unfiltered.